The whiskey-soaked laughter from the saloon stopped dead the moment Meredith Daniels walked past its swinging doors, her face carved from the same unforgiving granite as the Teton Mountains looming over Jackson, Wyoming. It was August of 1878, and the mountain town buzzed with trappers, cowboys, and prospectors seeking fortune in the rugged wilderness. But none of them had ever seen the young woman crack even the faintest smile since she had arrived 3 months prior. Warren Yates noticed her from where he stood loading supplies onto his pack mule outside the general store, his massive frame casting a shadow across the dusty boardwalk. He had heard the whispers in town, the curious speculation about the somber young woman who worked dawn to dusk at the boarding house without ever showing a hint of joy. His weathered hands, scarred from years of surviving alone in the high country, paused on the rope he was tying. Something about the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like a soldier expecting an attack, stirred something in his chest he had not felt in all his 30 years of living. Warren was not a man who frequented town often. His cabin sat high in the mountains, a full day's ride from Jackson, where he trapped beaver and hunted elk, living the solitary existence he had chosen after the war had taken too much from him. But twice a month he came down for supplies, his long, dark hair pulled back from a face that bore the marks of harsh winters and harder fights, his buckskin shirt stretched tight across shoulders and arms built from splitting wood, hauling game, and surviving where softer men perished. The townsfolk gave him respectful distance, knowing him as a man of few words and considerable strength. As Meredith disappeared around the corner toward the boarding house where she worked, Warren found himself wondering what tragedy had stolen the light from her eyes. He secured his supplies and led his mule down the main street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The August heat pressed down on Jackson like a heavy blanket, but the nights would already be turning cold up in his valley. He should have been heading back immediately, but instead, he found himself tying his mule outside the boarding house and stepping through its door. The interior was clean and simply furnished, with a desk near the entrance where guests signed the register. Meredith stood behind it, sorting through a stack of linens with mechanical efficiency. Up close, Warren could see she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 22 or 23, with rich brown hair pinned back in a practical bun and eyes the color of creek water over river stones. Her dress was simple calico, mended carefully in several places, and her hands showed the redness of constant washing and work. She looked up as he approached, and he saw her body tense slightly, the way a deer might freeze before deciding whether to bolt. Her expression remained neutral, professional, but completely devoid of warmth. "Help you?" she asked, her voice quiet and carefully controlled. Warren pulled off his hat, suddenly feeling like a bear who had wandered into a china shop. "Looking for a room," he heard himself say, though he had a perfectly good camp already set up outside town. $2 a night includes breakfast," Meredith replied, already turning the register toward him. "No smoking inside, no guests after 9 o'clock, no drinking in the rooms." He nodded and signed his name in the careful block letters he had learned in childhood, before the war, before the mountains. She handed him a key without ceremony, her fingers not quite touching his. "Room 4, top of the stairs on the left. Breakfast is at 6. She had already turned back to her linens, dismissing him. Warren climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, wondering what possessed him to spend $2 on a bed when his bedroll was perfectly adequate. The room was small but scrupulously clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. He set his pack down and looked out at the mountains in the distance, feeling restless in a way that had nothing to do with being confined indoors. That evening, he took his dinner at the boarding house table along with 3 other guests, 2 traveling salesmen, and an older man who claimed to be surveying for the railroad. Meredith served the meal with quiet efficiency, setting plates of beef stew and fresh bread before them without comment. The food was good, well-seasoned and hearty, but she never once responded to the attempts at conversation from the salesman, merely nodding or shaking her head as required. "That girl is strange," one of the salesmen muttered after she had returned to the kitchen. "Been here a week and I have not seen her smile once. Not natural for a young woman." Warren said nothing, spooning up his stew and watching the kitchen door. The next morning, he woke before dawn out of long habit and made his way downstairs to find Meredith already in the kitchen, pulling fresh biscuits from the oven. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, and in the soft glow of the lamp she looked even younger, more vulnerable. He cleared his throat and she turned, startled, one hand going to her chest. Sorry," he said quietly. "Did not mean to frighten you." She shook her head, already recovering her composure. "You are early. Breakfast is not for another half hour. I'm used to rising early. He stood awkwardly in the doorway. This man who could track a mountain lion through snow and break a horse with patience and strength, rendered uncertain by a slip of a woman with sad eyes. Can I help with anything? Meredith looked at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. Help? With breakfast. Carrying things, whatever needs doing. For a moment, something flickered in her expression, confusion or perhaps suspicion, but it was gone before he could name it. I can manage, thank you. Warren nodded and retreated to the dining room, but he watched through the doorway as she worked, noting the efficiency of her movements, the way she seemed to disappear into the tasks at hand as if work was a refuge from thought. When she finally brought out the platters of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, he thanked her quietly. She nodded and withdrew. After breakfast, Warren paid for another night, ignoring the practical voice in his head that said he was wasting money and time. He spent the morning at the blacksmith getting new traps repaired, and the afternoon restocking his ammunition and medical supplies. But his mind kept drifting to the boarding house, to the mystery of a woman who had forgotten how to smile. That evening, he arrived back as Meredith was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the boarding house. The clothesline was strung between two posts, and she was stretching to pin a sheet standing on her toes to reach. Warren watched for a moment, then approached and simply lifted the sheet higher, holding it steady while she pinned it. She froze, looking at him with those guarded eyes. I can manage, she said again, and he heard the steel beneath the quiet words. I know you can, Warren replied, his deep voice gentle. But you do not have to. Meredith stared at him for a long moment, something working in her expression that might have been anger or grief, or simply exhaustion. Then she took the next sheet from the basket and he held it without being asked, and they worked in silence until the basket was empty. When the last piece was hung, she finally spoke. Why are you still here? This is not a town for mountain men. There's nothing here for your kind. Maybe I'm tired of the mountains, Warren said, though it was not quite the truth. Then you are a fool. Mountains do not ask questions. Mountains do not expect things from you. She picked up the empty basket and turned toward the house, but he saw her hands trembling slightly on the wicker. What happened to you? The question was out before he could stop it, too direct, too personal. Meredith stopped walking but did not turn around. For a long moment she stood perfectly still, and Warren thought she would not answer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, Everything that could. She walked into the house and left him standing in the yard as the evening shadows lengthened and the first stars appeared over the Tetons. Warren stayed in Jackson for a week, extending his stay each morning with another $2 he could ill afford to waste. Each day, he found small ways to be present without demanding anything. He carried water from the pump when the buckets were heavy. He repaired a loose board on the porch steps without being asked. He split a cord of firewood that had been delivered and left in unwieldy chunks. And each evening, he sat at the dinner table and watched Meredith serve the meals with that same careful emptiness in her expression. The town noticed, of course. Jackson was small enough that nothing went unobserved, and the sight of the reclusive mountain man lingering in town, clearly focused on the somber girl from the boarding house, became a source of considerable speculation and gossip. That Yates fellow has taken a shine to Meredith Daniels, Mrs. Cooper told her husband at the general store, loud enough for several customers to hear. Though what good it will do him, I cannot say. That girl's heart is locked up tighter than a strongbox. Maybe that is what she needs, her husband replied, weighing out flour. Someone patient enough to wait. Patient or foolish, Mrs. Cooper sniffed, but there was a hint of approval in her voice. On the 8th morning, Warren came down to breakfast to find Meredith sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He froze in the doorway, every instinct screaming at him to go to her, but also knowing that pushing too fast would only drive her further away. Instead, he cleared his throat softly. She jerked upright, swiping at her eyes, her face flooding with color. I am sorry. Breakfast will be ready shortly. Forget breakfast, Warren said, his voice gentle but firm. What is wrong? Nothing, I'm fine. She stood and turned to the stove, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the pot handle. Warren crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, placed his large hands over her smaller ones. The pot settled back onto the stove. He could feel the tremors running through her, the fragility beneath the carefully maintained control. You do not have to be fine, he said quietly. Not with me. And that, somehow, was what broke her. Meredith turned and pressed her face against his chest, the sobs coming in earnest now, harsh and painful, as if torn from somewhere deep inside. Warren wrapped his arms around her, holding her steady, saying nothing because there were no words that could help. He simply stood like a mountain himself, solid and unmoving, and let her storm break against him. When the tears finally subsided, Meredith pulled back, embarrassed, not meeting his eyes. Warren released her immediately, giving her space. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "That was inappropriate." "Being human is never inappropriate." Warren pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. "Tell me." She shook her head. "You do not want to hear this. No one does." "I am still here," he pointed out. Meredith looked at him then, really looked at him, as if searching for something in his weathered face. Whatever she found there must have satisfied some need, because she sat down slowly. Warren took the chair across from her and waited. "My family died," she said finally, her voice flat and distant. 2 years ago. Cholera swept through our farm in Missouri. My mother, my father, my 2 younger brothers, all of them within a week. I survived. She said that last word like a curse. I buried them all, sold the farm to pay the debts, and came west because there was nothing left there but graves and memories. Warren felt the weight of her loss settle into his chest. He knew that particular kind of grief, the survivor's guilt that colored everything gray. "I worked in Denver for a year," Meredith continued, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Saved every penny to buy passage to California, thinking I could start fresh somewhere completely new. But the coach was robbed outside of here. The outlaws took everything, every cent I had saved, and they—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "They killed the driver and the other male passenger when they tried to resist. I thought they would kill me too, but they just laughed and rode off." "How long ago?" Warren asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the anger simmering in his gut. 3 months. I walked to Jackson with nothing but the clothes on my back. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house took pity on me, gave me work and a place to sleep. I've been saving again, trying to build up enough to continue on, but it is slow. Every day I wake up and wonder what the point is. Everyone I loved is dead. Everything I worked for is gone. And I am just here. Still breathing, still working, but not really living." She looked up at him, her eyes dry now, but infinitely weary. "So no, I do not smile. I do not see a reason to." Warren sat back, processing her words. He understood, perhaps better than she knew. He had felt that same emptiness after the war, after watching friends die in the mud, after coming home to find his own family's farm sold off and his parents moved on without leaving word of where they had gone. He had gone to the mountains to escape that hollow feeling, but he had learned something in his years of solitude. "I came to these mountains 8 years ago," he said slowly, "because I wanted to stop feeling anything. I figured if I got far enough away from people, the pain would stop mattering. And for a while it worked. The mountains are clean, simple. You work hard, you survive, you get lazy, you die. No complications." He leaned forward, his forearms on the table. "But you know what I learned? Feeling nothing is not the same as feeling better. It is just another kind of death, except your heart is still beating." Meredith looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "You have had terrible things happen to you," Warren continued. "Things that were not fair and not your fault, and you survived them. That takes strength most people do not have, but surviving is not the same as living, and living is not the same as being happy. Those are 3 different things, and you get to choose which one you want." "I do not know how to choose happiness," Meredith whispered. "I do not even remember what it feels like." Warren stood and held out his hand. "Then let me remind you. One day at a time." She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. It was broad and calloused, scarred from hard living, but steady. Finally, slowly, she placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. "What are you doing?" she asked as he led her toward the back door. "Something I should have done days ago. Forget breakfast. The guests can fend for themselves this once." They walked out into the morning, the air crisp and clean with the promise of autumn. Warren untied his mule from the post where he had left her, and then, to Meredith's surprise, he led the way not toward town but toward the edge of it, where the wilderness pressed close. She followed, too surprised to protest as he guided her up a narrow trail that wound into the foothills. They climbed for half an hour in silence, Warren setting an easy pace and occasionally offering his hand when the path grew steep. Meredith found herself breathing hard, not used to the exertion, but also feeling something loosening in her chest. Finally, Warren stopped at a small clearing that overlooked the valley, with Jackson spread out below and the Grand Tetons rising majestically beyond. "Look at that," Warren said simply, gesturing to the vista. Meredith looked. The morning sun was painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, and the valley below was a patchwork of green meadows and dark forest. The Snake River wound through it all like a ribbon of silver. It was breathtaking. "When I get too much in my own head," Warren said quietly, "I come to places like this. The mountains do not care about our tragedies. They were here long before us, and they will be here long after. But they are beautiful anyway. They just keep being beautiful, no matter what happens. There's something honest about that." Meredith stared at the view, feeling tears prick her eyes again, but different ones this time. "It is beautiful," she admitted. "So are you," Warren said, and when she turned to look at him in shock, he met her gaze steadily. "You do not see it because you are looking at yourself through the lens of everything you have lost. But I see a woman who survived impossible things and kept going. That is beautiful. That is worth smiling about." "I do not know how anymore," Meredith said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. Warren reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch careful, reverent. "Then I will just have to keep reminding you until you remember." They stood in the clearing as the sun climbed higher, and for the first time in 2 years, Meredith felt something other than numbness. It was not happiness, not yet, but it was a crack in the ice that had formed around her heart, and through that crack, light was beginning to seep in. They returned to the boarding house to find the guests had indeed fended for themselves, raiding the kitchen for bread and cheese, and Mrs. Henderson, the owner, waiting with her hands on her hips. She took one look at Meredith's face, however, at the subtle shift in her expression, and her annoyance evaporated. "About time someone got that girl out of this house," she muttered to Warren. "She works herself to the bone. Go on, Meredith. I will handle lunch. You take the afternoon." Meredith started to protest, but Warren was already guiding her back outside. "Come on, I'm not done with you yet." "You're impossibly bossy," she said, but there was the faintest hint of something in her voice that might have been amusement. "I prefer to think of it as determined," Warren replied, and he led her down the main street of Jackson, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed them. He took her to the general store, where he proceeded to buy her a small bag of peppermint sticks. When she protested that it was unnecessary, he simply unwrapped one and held it out to her. "When is the last time you had something just because it tasted good, not because you needed it to survive?" Meredith could not answer. She took the peppermint stick and put it in her mouth, and the sweet, sharp flavor burst across her tongue. She closed her eyes, and Warren saw her shoulders relax just a fraction. "There," he said softly. "That is a reason to smile. A small one. But it counts." They walked to the edge of town, where a small creek ran clear and cold from the mountains. Warren sat down on the bank and patted the ground beside him. Meredith sat, more relaxed now, sucking on the peppermint stick and watching the water rush over smooth stones. "Tell me something," Warren said after a while. "Before everything happened, what made you happy then?" Meredith was quiet for so long, he thought she would not answer. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "Reading. We did not have many books, but my mother had a volume of poetry and a novel by Mr. Dickens. I read them until the pages were falling out. I loved the way words could build whole worlds, could make you feel things that your own life did not give you." Her voice grew softer, more wistful. "I used to dream about going to a city with a real library, spending hours just reading everything I could get my hands on." "Jackson has a small library," Warren said. "Above the church. Not much, maybe 50 books, but they are there." Meredith turned to look at him. "I did not know that." "Because you have been too busy surviving to look for reasons to live," he pointed out gently. "Come on." He stood and offered his hand again, and this time she took it without hesitation. They walked back into town, and Warren led her to the small white church at the far end of the main street. Inside, a narrow staircase led to a loft where, true to his word, several shelves held a modest collection of books. Meredith moved toward them like a woman in a dream, her fingers trailing over the spines. Warren watched as her face transformed, animation creeping in to replace the careful blankness. She pulled down a volume of Tennyson and opened it, her eyes scanning the pages with hunger. "Take it," Warren said. "Bring it back when you are done and get another." "I do not have time to read," Meredith protested, but she was clutching the book to her chest like a lifeline. "Then make time." What is the point of surviving if you never do anything that feeds your soul? She looked at him, this mountain man with his rough appearance and surprisingly gentle wisdom, and something shifted in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why do you care whether I smile or not?" Warren considered his answer carefully. "Because when I first saw you, I recognized something. You were me 3 years ago, walking around, breathing, but not really alive. And I spent those 3 years alone in the mountains, trying to outrun the emptiness. It did not work. You know what finally started to work? Deciding that even if life had taken everything from me, I did not have to let it take my ability to feel joy. That was the one thing I could control." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I see you fighting so hard to keep yourself numb, and I want you to know you do not have to fight anymore. It is okay to let yourself feel again, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts, because that means you are alive." Meredith felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she did not turn away. "I'm afraid," she whispered, "if I let myself feel happy again, it will just be taken away. Everything always is." "Maybe," Warren acknowledged. "Life does not come with guarantees, but I can tell you this. I am not going anywhere, not unless you tell me to leave. And even then, I will probably argue with you about it." A sound escaped Meredith's throat, something between a sob and a laugh. It was not a smile, not yet, but it was close. Warren grinned at her, a genuine expression that transformed his rugged face into something almost boyish. "There," he said triumphantly. "I heard that. That was almost a laugh." "You are ridiculous," Meredith said, but her voice was warm. I prefer to think of it as charming," he replied, echoing his earlier words, and this time she did laugh, a small, rusty sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted him. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, Warren showing her corners of Jackson she had never bothered to explore in her 3 months there. He introduced her to the couple who ran the bakery, who pressed fresh cookies into her hands. He took her to the stable, where a new litter of barn kittens tumbled over each other in the hay, and watched as she knelt and let them climb into her lap, her face softening with wonder. He bought her a ribbon from the dry goods store, a simple blue one that matched her eyes, and when she protested again about the expense, he simply tied it around her wrist like a bracelet. "Now you have to keep it," he said, "because I'm a terrible shot at tying ribbons, and I'm not doing it again." By the time the sun was setting, Meredith was exhausted, but in a different way than usual. It was not the bone-deep weariness of too much work and too little hope. It was the pleasant tiredness of a day spent actually living. And when Warren walked her back to the boarding house, she turned to him at the door. "Thank you," she said simply, "for today, for all of this." "This is just the beginning," Warren promised. "I meant what I said. I will give you a reason to smile every day until you start finding them yourself. You cannot stay in town forever. You have your life in the mountains." Warren looked at her, at the way the evening light caught in her hair and the tentative hope in her eyes, and made a decision. "Then you will come with me sometimes, and I will come down to town more often. We will figure it out." "You barely know me," Meredith pointed out, but she was not arguing, not really. "Then I will get to know you, if you let me." Meredith searched his face, this man who had appeared in her life like an avalanche, unstoppable and transformative. "Why?" she asked again, needing to understand. Warren reached out and cupped her face gently in his large hand, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, someone worth fighting for. And because somewhere in the last week, I went from wanting to see you smile to needing to see it the way I need to breathe. So let me try, Meredith. Let me show you all the reasons you have to smile." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I will try," she whispered. "I cannot promise more than that. That is all I'm asking." He left her at the door and headed to the small room he had rented at the edge of town, no longer staying at the boarding house out of respect for her reputation. As he lay in his narrow bed that night, Warren realized he had not thought about his solitary mountain cabin once all day. He had been too focused on the way Meredith's expression had shifted from blank to curious to almost happy. He had been too caught up in the sound of her rusty laugh and the way she had clutched that book of poetry like it was treasure. He had come to town for supplies and was leaving with something far more precious, purpose, direction, and the beginning of something that felt dangerously like love. The next morning, Warren was waiting outside the boarding house at dawn with 2 horses saddled. When Meredith emerged to start breakfast, he held up a hand. "Mrs. Henderson has agreed to handle breakfast. You and I are taking a ride." "I cannot just leave," Meredith protested. but she was already looking at the horses with interest. "You can, and you will. When is the last time you took a day for yourself?" She could not answer because she could not remember. Warren took her silence as agreement and helped her mount the smaller of the two horses, a gentle mare with patient eyes. Meredith had not ridden in years, but it came back to her quickly, and soon they were riding out of Jackson as the sun rose over the mountains. Warren took her deep into the wilderness, up trails that wound through forests of lodgepole pine and across meadows filled with late summer wildflowers. They stopped at a high mountain lake that reflected the sky like polished glass, and he built a small fire to make coffee while she explored the shoreline. "This is one of my favorite places," Warren told her, handing her a tin cup of strong coffee. "I come here when I need to remember why I chose this life. It is beautiful without trying to be. It just exists, perfect in itself." Meredith sipped the coffee and looked out over the lake. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked. "Up here by yourself?" "I did not think I did," Warren admitted. "I convinced myself that solitude was what I wanted, but now I realize I was just afraid. It is easier to be alone than to risk caring about someone and losing them." "But you risk it anyway," Meredith said, looking at him. "With me." "With you," Warren confirmed, "because some things are worth the risk." They spent the day by the lake, talking in a way neither of them had talked to another person in years. Warren told her about the war, about the friends he had lost and the man he had been before it all. Meredith told him about her family, about her father's laugh and her mother's singing, and the way her brothers had followed her around like devoted puppies. They shared their griefs and their regrets, and in the sharing, both of them felt lighter. As the sun began to descend, Warren stood and held out his hand. "I want to show you something before we head back." He led her to a rocky outcropping above the lake, where they could see for miles in every direction. Mountains stretched to the horizon, peak after peak disappearing into the distance. The sky was beginning to color with sunset, streaks of orange and pink spreading across the blue. "This right here," Warren said, his arm around her shoulders as they stood together. "This is worth smiling about. This beauty, this moment, you and me standing here alive and breathing and actually feeling something. That is worth celebrating." Meredith leaned into his solid warmth, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Warren was not going to demand more than she could give. He was not going to push her to be something she could not be. He was simply there, steady as the mountains themselves, offering her a hand back to life. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on me even when I have given up on myself." Warren turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes serious. "Listen to me, Meredith Daniels. You are stronger than you think you are. You have survived things that would break most people. But surviving is not enough anymore. I want to see you thrive. I want to see you smile because you mean it, not because you are being polite. And I will spend every day showing you reasons to smile until you cannot help yourself." Meredith looked up at him, at this mountain man with his long hair and scarred hands and eyes that saw right through her defenses. And something in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for 2 years, cracked open just a little more. "I think I'm starting to remember how," she whispered. Warren smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "Good. Then I'm doing something right." They rode back to Jackson in the twilight, and when Warren helped her dismount outside the boarding house, his hands lingered on her waist. Their eyes met, and Meredith felt her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she was surprised to realize she wanted him to, but instead, he simply brushed his thumb across her cheek and stepped back. "Tomorrow," he promised, "another reason to smile." And he kept that promise. Every day, Warren found her. Sometimes it was early in the morning, bringing her coffee and fresh pastries from the bakery. Sometimes it was in the afternoon, stealing her away for walks along the creek or rides into the foothills. Sometimes it was just sitting on the porch of the boarding house in the evening, talking about everything and nothing while the stars came out. He brought her wildflowers that he had picked from high meadows. He taught her to skip stones across the creek. He made her laugh with stories about his mishaps in the wilderness, like the time he had accidentally fallen into a beaver pond and been chased by an irate beaver. He sat with her while she read from the library books, content just to be in her presence. And slowly, day by day, Meredith began to thaw. The careful blankness in her expression gave way to curiosity, then to interest, then to something that almost looked like happiness. She started to speak more freely, to offer opinions, to tease Warren back when he teased her. Color came back to her cheeks, light came back to her eyes. The town watched the transformation with approval and continued speculation. Bets were placed in the saloon about when Warren would propose. Mrs. Henderson beamed like a proud mother every time she saw them together. Even the gruff blacksmith nodded approvingly when Warren came in for work on his traps. "That Daniels girl is smiling now," he told Warren. "Saw her yesterday, actually laughing with the Cooper children. First time I've ever seen her look happy. You did that." Warren felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the forge. "She did it herself. I just reminded her how." 3 weeks after Warren had first extended his stay in Jackson, Meredith woke up and realized something had changed. She went through her morning routine, starting breakfast for the boarding house guests, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Warren, about seeing him later that day, and the thought made her feel something she had not felt in so long. She almost did not recognize it. Anticipation, excitement, joy. When Warren appeared that afternoon, she was waiting on the porch, and when he climbed the steps, she did something that shocked both of them. She smiled, a real, genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her entire face. Warren stopped dead, his eyes widening. "There it is," he said softly. "There is the smile I have been waiting for." "I woke up this morning and realized I was happy," Meredith said, wonder in her voice. "Actually happy, not just less sad. And it is because of you." Warren climbed the last step and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "No," he murmured into her hair. "It is because of you. You chose to let yourself feel again. You chose to live instead of just survive. I was just fortunate enough to be here to see it." Meredith pulled back enough to look up at him, her hands on his chest. "I do not want you to go back to the mountains," she admitted. "I know you have to. I know you have your life up there, but I hate it when you are gone." "Then come with me," Warren said immediately. "Come see where I live. Spend a few days in the high country. See if you could stand being with a stubborn mountain man long term." "Long term?" Meredith's heart was pounding. Warren cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious. "Meredith, I am not a man who is good with fancy words. I spent 8 years alone because I thought that was what I needed. But you have shown me that I was just hiding from life the same way you were. These past few weeks with you have been the best of my life. I wake up thinking about you and go to sleep doing the same. I want to keep giving you reasons to smile every day for the rest of my life. If you will let me." "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Meredith whispered. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Meredith Daniels. Actually, I think I fell in love with you that first morning when you cried in my arms and let me see how strong you really are. I want you in my life, in my cabin, in my future, all of it. If you want the same." Meredith felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I do not know how to live in the wilderness. I barely know how to ride a horse. I will probably be terrible at it." "I will teach you," Warren promised, "and you can teach me things too, like how to be patient with people instead of bears, how to talk about feelings instead of just surviving, how to build a life with someone instead of just existing alone." His thumb brushed away her tears. "Say yes, Meredith. Take a chance on me, on us, on being happy." "Yes," Meredith breathed, "yes to all of it." Warren kissed her then, and it was nothing like either of them expected. It was gentle and fierce at once, full of promise and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them had thought they would find. When they finally pulled apart, Meredith was laughing and crying at the same time, and Warren was grinning like a man who had just found gold. "We should probably tell Mrs. Henderson," Meredith said, trying to catch her breath. "We should probably tell the whole town, given how much they have been gossiping about us," Warren replied, and Meredith laughed again, the sound coming easier now. They told Mrs. Henderson that evening, and the older woman cried and hugged them both, already planning how quickly she could find a replacement for Meredith. They told the general store owner and the blacksmith and anyone else who would listen. And the next morning, Warren took Meredith up into the mountains to see his cabin. The ride took most of the day, climbing higher and higher until they were in country few people ever saw. Warren's cabin sat in a high valley, surrounded by forest and meadows, with a clear stream running nearby. It was small, just one room with a loft, but it was well built and snug, with a large stone fireplace and windows that looked out on a view that stole Meredith's breath. "It is beautiful," she said, standing in the doorway and taking it all in. "It is yours now, too," Warren said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "If you want it." Meredith leaned back against his broad chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady against her back. "I want it. I want all of it. But Warren, I need to tell you something. Anything. She turned in his arms to face him. I'm still scared. I'm scared that if I let myself be this happy, something will happen to take it away. I'm scared I will wake up and this will all be a dream. I am scared I do not deserve this. Warren looked at her with such tenderness it made her chest ache. Then we will be scared together. Because I am scared too. I am scared I will do something wrong and lose you. I am scared I do not know how to be what you need. But I am willing to be scared if it means I get to be with you. We will figure it out together, one day at a time. One day at a time, Meredith repeated, and she felt the fear loosen its grip just a little. They spent 3 days at the cabin, and Warren taught her the basics of mountain living, how to read the weather in the sky and the behavior of animals, how to identify edible plants and dangerous ones, how to fish in the cold stream and cook over an open fire. He showed her his trap lines and his hunting trails, the places where he had survived alone for so long. And Meredith taught him things too, though she did not realize it at first. She taught him how to talk about his feelings instead of burying them. She taught him that it was okay to need someone, that needing help was not the same as being weak. She brought books to the cabin and read to him in the evenings while he worked on repairing gear, and he discovered he loved the sound of her voice bringing stories to life. On their last night before heading back to Jackson, they sat by the fire and talked about their future. I want to marry you properly, Warren said, with the preacher and witnesses and whatever ceremony you want, but I also want you to be sure. Take whatever time you need to be certain this is what you want. I am certain, Meredith said without hesitation. I've never been more certain of anything, but I do have one request. Name it. I want us to go back to Missouri first. I want to visit their graves and say goodbye properly. I never had a chance to mourn the right way because I was too busy trying to survive, but I need to do that now, with you beside me. And then I want to start our life together with a clean slate. Warren took her hand and brought it to his lips. Then that is what we will do. We will go together, and you can say everything you need to say, and then we will come back here and build our life. They returned to Jackson the next day, and the town buzzed with excitement when word spread that Warren Yates and Meredith Daniels were engaged. Mrs. Henderson immediately began planning a wedding for before the heavy snows came, giving them just 6 weeks to prepare. But first, Meredith and Warren needed to make their journey east. They left in early September, traveling by stagecoach and train across the vast distances to Missouri. It was Meredith's first time on a train, and Warren watched with pleasure as she pressed her face to the window like a child, marveling at the speed and the changing landscape. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and preferences, the small details that build intimacy. Warren discovered that Meredith hummed when she was content and bit her lower lip when she was concentrating. She learned that he was ticklish along his ribs despite his tough exterior, and that he had a surprisingly sweet tooth. They held hands across the train seats and fell asleep with their heads together, and every moment felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of their future. When they finally reached the small cemetery outside of what had been Meredith's family farm, it was raining softly. Warren stood back and let Meredith approach the graves alone, giving her the space she needed. He watched as she knelt in the wet grass and placed wildflowers she had picked along the way on each grave. He saw her shoulders shake with sobs, and it took every ounce of his willpower not to go to her. But this was something she needed to do alone. This final goodbye. After a long while, Meredith stood and turned to him, holding out her hand. Warren went to her immediately, wrapping her in his arms as the rain fell around them. I told them about you, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. I told them I found someone who makes me want to smile again. I think they would have liked you. I wish I could have met them, Warren said honestly. Anyone who raised you must have been remarkable people. They stood together in the rain until Meredith was ready to leave, and then they walked back to the train station hand in hand. On the journey back to Wyoming, Meredith was quieter but at peace, and Warren knew she had needed that closure more than she had realized. Thank you, she said as they watched the landscape roll past the train windows, for understanding why I needed to do that, for not trying to rush me past my grief. Grief is not something you get past, Warren said, remembering his own losses. It is something you learn to carry, but it is lighter when you are not carrying it alone. Meredith turned and kissed him, soft and sweet, and Warren felt his heart swell with love for this woman who had been strong enough to survive hell and brave enough to choose happiness anyway. They returned to Jackson in late September, with the aspen trees turning gold and the air sharp with approaching winter. Mrs. Henderson had everything ready for the wedding, scheduled for the first Saturday in October. The whole town was invited, and it seemed like the whole town planned to attend. The night before the wedding, Meredith stayed at the boarding house while Warren camped outside of town, honoring the tradition of not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Meredith lay awake for a long time, thinking about how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She had gone from a woman who could not remember how to smile to a woman about to marry a man who made her laugh every single day. It felt like a miracle, like something too good to be true. But when morning came and Mrs. Henderson helped her into the simple white dress they had made together, when Meredith looked at herself in the mirror and saw the glow in her cheeks and the light in her eyes, she knew it was real. She had found her way back to life, and tomorrow she would start building a future with the man who had shown her how. The wedding was held in the small church where Meredith had first discovered the library, and every pew was packed. Meredith walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, but she did not feel alone. The entire town had become her family in the past months, and Warren stood at the front waiting for her with such love in his eyes that she nearly started crying before she even reached him. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, the words binding them together in the sight of God and community. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed Meredith with a tenderness that made several of the watching women dab at their eyes. And when they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Yates, Meredith was smiling so broadly that someone in the back let out a cheer. The celebration afterward was held at the saloon, hastily cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was music and dancing and more food than seemed possible from such a small town. Warren danced with his bride, his large hands gentle on her waist as they swayed to the fiddle music, and Meredith laughed with pure joy. "Happy?" Warren asked, looking down at her. "Deliriously," Meredith replied, and it was the absolute truth. They spent their first night as husband and wife in a room above the general store that the Coopers had offered them, and Warren made love to his wife with a reverence and passion that left them both breathless and trembling. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking in whispers as the town settled into quiet around them. "I want to give you everything," Warren murmured, running his fingers through her loosened hair. "I want to spend every day of my life making you happy." "You already do," Meredith said, tracing the scars on his chest, each one a story of survival. "Just by being you. By seeing me when I could not see myself, by not giving up on me." "I will never give up on you," Warren promised, "even when you drive me crazy, which you probably will." Meredith laughed softly. "I definitely will. I can be stubborn when I want to be." "Good. I like a woman with spine." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I love you, Meredith Yates. I will spend the rest of my life earning that smile of yours." "You've already earned it," Meredith whispered, "every day in 1,000 small ways. I love you too, Warren. More than I knew I could still love anything." They stayed in Jackson for another week, tying up loose ends and saying goodbyes, and then they rode up into the mountains together to begin their life at Warren's cabin. Meredith was nervous about the transition, worried she would not be able to adapt to the isolation and the hard work of mountain living. But Warren was patient with her, teaching her everything he knew, and she discovered she had more resilience than she had given herself credit for. She learned to chop wood and haul water, to preserve meat and tan hides. She learned to read the weather and the animal signs that told Warren when to set his traps and when to stay near the cabin. She learned to shoot his rifle and skin the game they hunted together. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done at the boarding house, but it was satisfying in a way that surprised her. She was building something, creating a life with her own hands alongside the man she loved, and Warren learned from her too. He learned to appreciate the books she read aloud in the evenings, discovering worlds beyond the mountains he had known. He learned to talk about his feelings instead of bottling them up until they exploded. He learned that having someone to share his life with made even the hardest days bearable and the good days transcendent. Winter came early and hard that year, the first snows falling in late October and not letting up until April. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, the world outside their cabin reduced to white and wind. But inside, with the fire burning and Meredith in his arms, Warren had never been happier. They talked for hours, made love in front of the fireplace, cooked together and ate together, and simply existed together in a way that felt like the most natural thing in the world. I used to dread winter, Warren told her one night as they lay in the loft bed they shared, listening to the wind howl outside. It meant months of isolation, nothing but my own thoughts for company. But this winter, with you here, it feels like a gift. Time to just be together without the world intruding. Meredith snuggled closer to his warmth, her head on his broad chest. I never thought I would be happy again, she admitted. After losing everyone, I thought happiness was something that had died with them. But you showed me that grief and joy can exist side by side. I miss my family every day, but I'm also happier than I've ever been. Both things are true. Both things are true, Warren agreed, holding her tight. And both things are allowed. Love is not a limited resource. You can love the people you lost and love me and our life together. One does not diminish the other. Spring came eventually, the snow melting to reveal a world reborn in green and gold. Meredith discovered she was pregnant in May, and Warren was so overcome with joy and terror that he actually sat down hard on the floor. A baby, he repeated, looking at her with wide eyes. We are having a baby. We are, Meredith confirmed, laughing at his expression. Are you happy? Happy? I'm terrified. I do not know the first thing about babies. He ran his hands through his long hair, making it stand up wildly. What if I do something wrong? What if I hurt the baby by accident? My hands are so big and rough. Meredith knelt in front of him and took those big, rough hands in hers. You will be an amazing father. You are gentle and patient and strong. You will teach our child everything they need to know to survive in this world, and I will teach them to read and dream. Together, we will raise them right. Warren pulled her into his lap, careful already of the tiny life growing inside her. A baby, he said again, wonder replacing the terror. Our baby. Our baby, Meredith confirmed, and she kissed him with all the love and promise she felt. They made the journey down to Jackson in late May, so Meredith could be closer to the town's doctor as her pregnancy progressed. Warren refused to take any chances with her health, and though Meredith protested that women had been having babies in the wilderness since the beginning of time, she secretly appreciated his protectiveness. They rented a small house on the edge of town for the summer, and Warren found work as a scout and guide for hunting parties, while Meredith helped Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house when she felt up to it. The town watched Meredith's pregnancy with the same fond attention they had watched her courtship, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and general fussing that made Warren grumble, but Meredith appreciate. You should see the quilts the church ladies have made, Meredith told Warren one evening, showing him a stack of lovingly crafted blankets. I never expected people to be so generous. They love you, Warren said simply. You came here broken, and you healed yourself. People respect that, and they saw how you and I found each other. That gives them hope that happiness is possible even after tragedy. In early December, with snow falling gently outside and Warren pacing the floor like a caged mountain lion, Meredith gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, and Warren nearly broke down the door trying to get to her when he heard her cry out. But when the doctor finally let him into the room and he saw Meredith holding their tiny red-faced baby, everything else fell away. Meet your son, Meredith said, exhausted but radiant. I was thinking we could name him Thomas after my father. Warren took the baby with shaking hands, this tiny scrap of humanity that was part him and part Meredith, and entirely miraculous. Thomas Yates, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Welcome to the world, son. The baby yawned and opened his eyes, and Warren felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it terrified him. This was what he had been missing, what he had been hiding from in the mountains. This connection, this family, this reason to live rather than just survive. Oh. Thank you, he told Meredith, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything. Meredith smiled up at him, and it was the smile he had worked so hard to earn, the smile that meant real, deep, abiding happiness. Thank you for teaching me how to smile again, for showing me that life after loss is not just possible but beautiful. They stayed in Jackson through the winter, wanting to be close to help as Meredith recovered, and they learned how to be parents. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and alert with Warren's dark hair and Meredith's gray-blue eyes. Warren was terrified he would break the tiny infant at first, but Meredith taught him how to hold and feed and soothe their son, and soon he was as comfortable with the baby as he was with his traps and his rifle. "You are a natural," Meredith told him, watching as Warren walked around their small house with Thomas against his broad shoulder, patting the baby's back and humming tunelessly. "I have a good teacher," Warren replied, looking at her with such love it made her chest tight. They returned to the mountain cabin in the spring, and Meredith fell in love with it all over again, seeing it now as their home rather than just Warren's refuge. They added a room for Thomas, expanding the cabin with Warren's skilled hands and Meredith's planning. They built furniture and planted a garden and created a life that was hard but deeply satisfying. Thomas grew strong and healthy, learning to walk in the meadows around the cabin and babbling his first words with the creek burbling in the background. Warren taught him to identify animal tracks in the mud, and Meredith sang him songs while she worked. They were happy in a way neither of them had imagined possible back when they first met, two broken people who had somehow found wholeness in each other. 2 years after Thomas was born, Meredith gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Warren's mother. She had Warren's strength and Meredith's stubborn determination, and she ruled her older brother with an iron fist from the moment she could crawl. Warren doted on his daughter shamelessly, this tiny, fierce thing who looked at him with complete trust and adoration. "You have gone soft," Meredith teased him one evening, watching as Warren let Sarah pull his hair and stick her fingers in his mouth while he made exaggerated faces that sent her into gales of laughter. "Maybe," Warren admitted, kissing Sarah's chubby hand. "But if being soft means loving my family with everything I have, then I am fine with that." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and milestones. Thomas learning to ride and hunt at his father's side. Sarah proving she could keep up with her brother despite being younger and smaller. More trips down to Jackson to visit friends and stock up on supplies. Long winters spent as a family in the cozy cabin, telling stories and reading books and simply being together. Meredith sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Jackson, that hollow-eyed creature who could not remember how to smile. She felt compassion for that woman, but also gratitude that she had survived long enough to meet Warren to let him show her the way back to life. Every morning when she woke up beside her husband, every time her children laughed, every sunset they watched together from the porch of their cabin, she felt that gratitude anew. "Do you ever regret it?" Warren asked her one night, after the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch watching the stars. Giving up the possibility of civilization, of an easier life. You could have gone to California like you planned, started fresh in a city with libraries and shops and all the things women are supposed to want. Meredith looked at him, at this man who had made it his mission to give her reasons to smile and had ended up giving her reasons to live. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You gave me something more precious than any city could offer. You gave me back myself. You showed me that I was strong enough to survive my losses and brave enough to risk loving again. And you gave me a family, a real home, a life filled with purpose and joy. How could I possibly regret that?" Warren pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, wood smoke and pine, and something uniquely Meredith. "I love you," he said, as he said every day. "More than I have words for." "I love you too," Meredith replied as she replied every day. "You are my reason to smile, Warren Yates, every single day." They sat together in the mountain darkness, two souls who had been lost and found each other, and above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent and beautiful and eternal. When Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 8, Meredith gave birth one more time, to twin boys they named Jacob and James. The twins were a handful from the start, energetic and mischievous, keeping both parents on their toes. The cabin felt smaller with 6 people in it, so Warren spent that summer building an addition, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. Thomas helped his father with the construction, learning carpentry and engineering alongside the hunting and tracking skills Warren had already taught him. Sarah helped her mother with the twins, proving to have a gift for soothing babies even as she maintained her fierce independence. The family worked together, each member contributing what they could, and Meredith marveled at what they had built. Not just the cabin and the life they had carved from the wilderness, but the love and trust and genuine happiness that filled every corner of their home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren surprised Meredith by taking her back to Jackson for a night alone, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson, who had long since become their chosen grandmother. They had dinner at the saloon, now much fancier than it had been a decade earlier, and danced to music played by a traveling band. "Do you remember our wedding?" Warren asked, holding her close as they swayed to a waltz. Every moment, Meredith replied, looking up at him. His hair was shot through with gray now, and there were new lines around his eyes, but he was still the strongest, most handsome man she had ever seen. I remember thinking I did not deserve to be that happy, that something would happen to take it all away. But nothing did, Warren pointed out. Nothing did, Meredith agreed. We had hard times, of course. That winter, Thomas had pneumonia and we thought we might lose him. The year the garden failed and we had to make supplies stretch, all the normal struggles of life. But we faced them together, and that made all the difference. Warren kissed her there on the dance floor, and she felt like that young woman again, hesitantly accepting his invitation to live, to feel, to smile. Except now she did not hesitate. Now she kissed him back with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly how lucky she was and intended to appreciate every moment of it. Thank you, Warren said when they finally pulled apart, for taking a chance on a stubborn mountain man who did not know the first thing about making a woman happy but was determined to figure it out. Thank you, Meredith replied, for not letting me disappear into my grief, for pulling me back into the light and showing me that life after loss is not just possible, but can be more beautiful than anything that came before. They walked through Jackson arm in arm that night, looking at the town that had grown and changed alongside them. New buildings stood where old ones had been, new families had moved in, but the heart of the community remained the same, hard-working people doing their best to build good lives in difficult country. As they prepared to head back into the mountains the next morning, back to their children and their cabin and their life, Meredith paused and looked back at the boarding house where it had all begun. She remembered standing at that desk, hollow and numb, certain she would never feel anything good again. And she remembered Warren walking through the door, this huge, quiet man who had seen straight through her walls to the person beneath. "What are you thinking?" Warren asked, following her gaze. "I'm thinking about that first day," Meredith said, "about how close I came to never knowing any of this. If you had not been in town that day, if you had not decided to stay, if you had given up when I pushed you away, which I did repeatedly." "But I did not give up," Warren said firmly, "because I saw something in you worth fighting for, and I am not a man who walks away from a fight, especially not when the stakes are this high." "The stakes being my happiness?" Meredith teased gently. "The stakes being our happiness," Warren corrected. "Yours and mine. We saved each other, Meredith. Do not ever forget that." They rode home through country they knew as well as their own hands, and when they crested the final ridge and saw their cabin in the valley below, smoke rising from the chimney where their children waited, Meredith felt a swell of emotion so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "This is what happiness looks like," she said, more to herself than to Warren. "Not perfect, not without struggle, but real and earned and all the more precious for it." Warren reached over and took her hand, and they rode down into their valley together, two people who had learned the hard way that the worst moments of life do not have to define you. That grief and joy can coexist, that love, real love, is worth any risk, and that sometimes the mission to make someone smile can turn into the mission of a lifetime. The years continued to pass as years do, bringing their mix of challenges and celebrations. Thomas grew into a young man much like his father, strong and quiet and deeply competent in the wilderness. He courted and married a girl from Jackson, bringing her into the family with joy. Sarah remained fiercely independent, eventually becoming one of the few female guides in the Wyoming Territory, leading hunting and sightseeing parties through the mountains she knew so well. The twins, Jacob and James, were inseparable, and together they built a successful fur trading business that expanded their family's reach and influence. Through it all, Warren and Meredith remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They aged together, their bodies growing slower, but their love growing deeper. On cold winter nights, they would sit by the fire and remember those early days, marveling at how far they had come. "Do you remember what you told me that first day?" Meredith asked Warren one such night, her hand in his as they watched the flames dance. They were in their 60s now, their children grown and starting families of their own, but they still lived in the mountain cabin, unwilling to leave the place that held so many memories. "I told you a lot of things that first day," Warren replied, his voice still deep though touched by age. "Which particular gem of wisdom are you referring to?" Meredith laughed, that easy laugh he had worked so hard to earn. "You said that surviving was not the same as living, and living was not the same as being happy, that they were three different things, and I got to choose which one I wanted." "Did I really say that?" I was smarter than I thought, Warren said with a grin. You were exactly that smart, Meredith confirmed. And you were right. I had been surviving, just barely when you showed up, and you taught me not just to live again, but to choose happiness every single day. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Warren lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. The gift was mutual love. You taught me that isolation was not strength, that needing someone was not weakness, and that opening your heart to another person was the bravest thing anyone could do. We taught each other how to be human again, how to be vulnerable and strong at the same time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence only possible between two people who had shared decades of life together. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Inside, the fire crackled and the cabin creaked with familiar sounds, and Meredith felt a profound sense of contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. I have been thinking, Warren said eventually, about the day we met, about how I made it my mission to give you a reason to smile every day. You succeeded admirably, Meredith said. I smile every day because of you. That's the thing, though, Warren continued. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being a mission and just became who we were. I do not think about making you smile anymore. I think about being with you, sharing life with you, and the smiles just happen naturally for both of us. That is what love is supposed to do, I think. Transform from something you work at into something you simply are. Meredith turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person can be saved. You are absolutely right. We are not the people we were when we met. We are better, whole where we were broken, happy where we were empty, and it all started because you saw someone who needed help and decided to help her, even when she pushed you away. Best decision I ever made, Warren said simply. Second best, Meredith corrected with a smile. The best decision was asking me to marry you. Fair point, Warren conceded, pulling her closer. Though technically you were the one who said yes, so maybe that was your best decision. They laughed together, easy and comfortable, and Meredith thought about all the days and nights they had shared, the births and the near losses, the long winters and the brilliant summers, the quiet moments and the dramatic ones, the struggles that had tested them and the joys that had sustained them. All of it, every moment had been worth it. As they prepared for bed that night, moving through their routines with the ease of long practice, Meredith caught sight of herself in the small mirror they kept in the bedroom. Her hair was mostly gray now, her face lined with years and weather. But her eyes were bright and her smile was real, and she barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman she had been all those years ago. What are you looking at? Warren asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Just remembering, Meredith said softly. The woman I was, the woman you helped me become. You did that yourself, Warren insisted, as he always did. I just held up a mirror so you could see what I saw. Strength, resilience, beauty inside and out. It was always there, even when you could not see it. Meredith leaned back against him, still marveling after all these years at how safe she felt in his arms. We saved each other, she said, echoing his words from so long ago, and we built something beautiful together. I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the part where you cried in my arms and probably got my shirt all soggy, Warren teased. Not even that, Meredith confirmed. That was when I started to trust you, when I realized you were strong enough to handle my grief without flinching. They stood together in the lamplight, two people who had walked through fire and come out stronger on the other side. Two people who had chosen each other and then chosen each other again every single day since. Two people who had learned that the opposite of grief was not the absence of love, but the presence of it in abundance. I love you, Meredith said as she said every night. I love you too, Warren replied, as he replied every night. Thank you for smiling for me, with me, because of me. Thank you for choosing happiness when it would have been easier to stay numb. Thank you for taking a chance on a mountain man who did not know what he was doing but was determined to figure it out. Thank you for not giving up on me, Meredith whispered, for seeing past the walls I built and finding me underneath, for giving me reasons to smile until I started finding them myself, for loving me even when I could not love myself. They climbed into bed and held each other close, and Meredith drifted off to sleep thinking about how far they had come. From that first day in Jackson when she had been too numb to even register his presence, to this moment decades later, surrounded by family and love and a life beyond anything she could have imagined. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Meredith woke to find Warren already up, standing at the window looking out at their valley. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist, and together they watched the sun paint the mountains gold. "Beautiful," Warren said softly. "Beautiful," Meredith agreed, and she was not sure if he meant the view or their life or both. But it did not matter because it was all beautiful, all worth celebrating, all worth the fight it had taken to get here. That day passed, much like thousands of other days had passed, filled with simple tasks and small pleasures. They worked in the garden together, harvesting vegetables for winter storage. They mended fences and chopped wood. They ate lunch on the porch and watched deer graze in the meadow. They read together in the afternoon, sharing passages from books they loved. And through it all, they smiled. Not because they were trying to, not because it was a mission or a goal, but simply because they were happy. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Warren pulled Meredith close and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Meredith asked. "For everything. For saying yes when I asked you to let me try. For taking a chance on us. For building this life with me. For every smile, every laugh, every moment of joy. For proving that broken things can be mended and broken people can heal. For being exactly who you are." Meredith turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "You gave me everything," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my life when I was certain it was over. You showed me that happiness was not just for other people, that I deserved it too. You loved me when I could not love myself, and you waited patiently while I learned how again. You are everything to me, Warren Yates, everything." They kissed as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something precious from the wreckage of their pasts. And as the first stars appeared overhead, Meredith smiled, that genuine, radiant smile that had started as Warren's mission and become his greatest reward. The smile that said better than any words could that she was happy, truly and deeply happy, and that she would carry that happiness with her for all her remaining days. Their story was not perfect. No story is. There had been struggles and setbacks, times when they argued and times when life felt overwhelming. But through it all, they had held on to each other and the love they had built. They had chosen happiness when it would have been easier to choose bitterness. They had chosen hope when despair beckoned. They had chosen each other over and over again in 1,000 small ways that added up to a lifetime. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not that they had avoided pain or loss, because they had not, but that they had faced it together, and in facing it together, had discovered that love was stronger than grief, that joy could coexist with sorrow, and that the human capacity for happiness was far greater than either of them had ever imagined. As they walked back into their cabin, hand in hand, ready to end another day in the long string of days that made up their life together, Meredith paused at the door and looked back at the mountains one more time. Those mountains had been Warren's refuge when he needed to escape from feeling. They had become her home when she needed to learn how to feel again. And now they stood as silent witnesses to the miracle of two broken people who had found wholeness in each other. "Come on," Warren said gently, tugging her hand. "It is getting cold out here." Meredith followed him inside, into the warmth and light of their home, smiling all the way. Because Warren Yates had made it his mission to give her a reason to smile every day, and even though the mission had long since been accomplished, the smiles kept coming anyway, as natural and inevitable as sunrise. And that, Meredith thought as she settled into bed beside her husband of decades, was the greatest gift of all. Not just that she had learned to smile again, but that she had found someone who made smiling the easiest thing in the world.